So it transpires that fantasy fatigue is a very real thing. Hello, welcome to the Book Thing. My name's Mark and welcome to my wrap up for everything that I read in November. And I think this is probably going to be a pretty short video because I didn't get to finish that many books in November. I've had a very weird last couple of weeks for a reason that I can't tell you about. Not yet. It's something I can tell you about in the future. It's not really to do with the channel. It's nothing bad, but it was very weird. And that very weird thing had a bit of a knock-on effect to my reading, and everything kind of got a little bit unsettled. So even though I've probably read between sort of 4 and 5 books this month, I've got about 5 or 6 books that I'm in various stages of reading that I haven't finished, which I will probably be finishing within the next week or so, which means December is going to look like I've read a massive amount when in actual fact it's a lot of finishing off of books that I'd started in November. And actually any of the books that I have finished, most of them I'm not really going to talk about because I've got other videos either done or coming for those particular books as well. But hey ho, lucky you don't get to hear me rabbit on so much this month. So first up was the first of my 50 books before 50 that I read, and that was Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. Dark fantasy story about a mysterious magical carnival that comes to town and causes all these problems for these 2 young boys. I did an entire video about my thoughts on Something Wicked This Way Comes, and I'll put a link to that in the description. But suffice to say, really enjoyed it, and my 50 books before 50 has gotten off to a solid start. The next reading project I've got on is my reread of the entirety of the Cosmere that I'm going to do slowly over the next couple of years up until the point that Brandon Sanderson releases his new series Ghostbloods, which is the Mistborn Phase 3, Era 3, whatever it happens to be. So I did a video giving the order that I'm going to read the Cosmere books in, and the first one that I read was The Final Empire, or just Mistborn, which is the first of his Mistborn books. Long time since I read this, and I have to say, it holds up pretty well. It feels a bit more YA than other fantasy books that I have read recently. If you don't know about Mistborn, this is a story of a young thief called Vin who discovers that she is actually something called a Mistborn, which means that she has all these magical abilities, and she is recruited to be part of this crew which is attempting to take down an evil dark ruler. So as far as fantasy plots go, it's a pretty standard affair, but it's genuinely pretty enjoyable. And as a follow-on to that, the next thing I read was the short story called The 11th Metal, which is a direct prequel to the first Mistborn book. I have to say with both of these, I enjoyed them an awful lot more than I've enjoyed Sanderson's more recent stuff, so it kind of reminded me of why I started to like Brandon Sanderson in the first place. Either way, because this is part of my whole Mistborn reread, I will be putting a separate review video for these 2 up separately, and you should be seeing that fairly soon. Next book I read was Obsidian Murders by Nicole Brona, and if you've heard of Nicole Brona, you'll know that she is the eponymous Nicole from Nicole's Bookish Nook, the BookTube channel, which I absolutely love, and I was fortunate enough to do an episode of her interview with a Fox podcast with her just over a week ago. I really had a blast chatting to Nicole, and before we had our chat, I thought it best that I'd bought her book quite some time ago and it had been sitting there, and I thought, do you know what, I probably better read this before I sit down in conversation with Nicole, and I'm really glad I did because it is an awful lot of fun. This is the story of Tessa, who is this journalist, but a journalist who also has this sensitivity to all things magical and supernatural. So she sees various different magical beings that are invisible to normal people and all of this sort of thing, and she gets involved in investigating a series of murders. It's an urban fantasy series. It is a hell of a lot of fun. I gave it 4 stars, really enjoyed it, and you should definitely check out the book, and you should also definitely check out Nicole's channel. I'll leave a link down to the podcast that we did together in the description below. And the final book I finished in November, I know, not a lot really. But it was Empire in Black and Gold by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And I finished this as an audiobook. So this is one of Adrian Tchaikovsky's earliest books. And it is a fantasy series about this, and it's a lot to do with sort of political intrigue and things like that, and sort of international diplomacy and things. But it's essentially down to this invasive empire that is taking over some of the various different lands of this particular fantasy world. Now, what makes this story unique is the world building that's involved, because all of the various different races of people in this particular world are based on the affinity that they have with a type of bug, insect. I mean, they're not insects. I mean, there's things like spiders and scorpions and things like that as well. So it's not insects as such, but basically you have people who are referred to as ants and beetles and wasps. The Empire in Black and Gold of the title is the Wasp Empire that's invading. And herein lies my problem with the book, because I could never get on board with that central premise of the world building. It really just didn't work for me. And every single time someone was referred to as an ant or a scorpion or a beetle or a grasshopper, it just took me right out of the story. And it is partly responsible for why I got through so few books this month, because it just took me so long to get through it, because I just couldn't properly get immersed in it. The problem was, for me, it just felt too silly. And I know fantasy is kind of silly. I mean, like, we all have to accept the fact that dragons and shit don't actually exist. And you have to do the whole suspension of disbelief thing. And it's just that suspension of disbelief was just a step too far for me, which is a real shame, because the characters are very well realized, the world is very well described, the story is extremely well thought out, but I just couldn't get into it. The immersion for this was just completely killed by the fact that everyone was being referred to as beetles and ants and spiders and things like that all the time. And it doesn't let up. He leans heavily into this as his world building the entire way through the actual novel. This is the first part of a trilogy, and I gotta be honest, I don't think I'm going to be picking up the rest of the trilogy. I gave this 2.5 stars, and I think this is very possibly a me problem, because I think there's an element of me just having been hit with a bit of fantasy fatigue. Because if you look at everything that I read this month, Something Wicked This Way Comes, The Final Empire, The 11th Metal, Obsidian Murders, this Empire in Black and Gold, and the previous month, the last book I'd finished off was The Devils by Joe Abercrombie, and I'm also nearly finished, which I mostly read in November, The Strength of the Few, the next part after The Will of the Many by James Islington. So it's been a lot of fantasy, and I think An Empire in Black and Gold might just have been my saturation point, and that's partly why I've taken against it as much as I did. So yeah, even though I've really enjoyed what I've read of Adrian Tchaikovsky before, Empire in Black and Gold was very much a miss for me. So much for me getting an advanced review copy of Children of Strife. I'm joking. I've already got an advanced review copy of Children of Strife. So yeah, there's about 5 books that I have incomplete at this moment in time. One being The Strength of the Few by James Islington, which I will be doing a review for soon, and that will be also in my December wrap-up. And because of my bit of fantasy fatigue, I'm actually reading a couple of non-fiction books as well, just to try and ground me in a bit of reality again before I read anything that is a bit more fantastical again. And at some point in the near future, I will explain to you why this has been such a weird month and why it had such a big impact on my reading. But just not yet. You're going to have to be patient on that one. But in the meantime, thanks a million for taking the time to watch my short wrap-up for November. I hope you enjoyed it, and take care.